morning and welcome at the Diplomatic Academy for our series Diplomacy, Your Questions, Our Answers. It's a pleasure tonight to have ambassadors and professors and students of the Academy with me to discuss the anniversary of Mercosur. Mercosur celebrates 30 years of its existence, and we want to discuss and look ahead into the future. I guess this will be a very interesting discussion because we have with us Jose Antonio Marcondes, the ambassador of the Republic of Brazil. Welcome. We have Ambassador Juan Ojeda Viglione, the ambassador of the Eastern Republic of Uruguay with us. And we have Professor Alejandro Cunat from the University of Vienna with us. And the moderation will be done by one of our students from the master program, the second year of master program, Vanessa Cazares. Welcome also to you. Well, it's maybe a happy occasion, although when I open the new edition of The Economist of tomorrow, it has an article saying, can Mercosur reverse decades of backsliding? And the subtitle is even more dramatic. It says, the South American trade group marks an unhappy 30th birthday. And the article goes on along this line that this was a very revolutionary step 30 years ago when it was founded. It was the time of free trade around the globe, actually. And the first 10 years were happy years of attempts of a real Latin American integration. But then something seemed to have happened. The free trade issues became more difficult, and the article of the Economist even closes with the fear that Mercosur risks becoming another relic of Latin America's persistent failure to integrate now for more than half a century, it says. So where are we actually? We are celebrating here this integration project of one of the biggest areas, free trade areas in the world. I think it's number 4 or number 5 in trade. And we have to say, it is something very special that we have the most ambitious project in Latin America with Mercosur. I would say that the interesting thing about this is that Mercosur is still alive. And that you have all these activities trying also to make trade agreements with other parts of the world. And I'm sure we will also speak about the 20 years of negotiations with the European Union and the situation we are in today. So I guess we have a lot on our table to discuss. What is Mercosur? What might be the future of Mercosur? How are the relations with the rest of the world? And I'm much looking forward to our discussion. And having said all this, I pass over to our moderator, Vanessa, to take over the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Brix, for your kind words and introduction. I'm Vanessa Cazares, and I will have the honor to be moderating this talk today. And please let me welcome our speakers, and I will start by introducing them. First, we have Ambassador Juan Ojeda Viglione. He has a degree in diplomacy by the Universidad de la República from Montevideo, Uruguay. He also has studies of law from the Universidad de la República, Montevideo, Uruguay. He's currently ambassador to the Republic of Austria since September 2019. And he's also the permanent representative to the international organizations at Vienna, such as United Nations Office at Vienna, International Atomic Energy Agency, UNIDO, and the Preparatory Commission for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. He has vast experience in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He first joined the Foreign Service as third secretary in 1982. He has been also holding different positions in embassies around the world, such as in the Arab Republic of Egypt, in Japan, Dominican Republic, Israel, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the Republic of Armenia. He also participated in the pre-deployment training courses to Uruguayan troops in peacekeeping operations and has accomplished several official missions abroad. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. Bienvenido. We also have today Ambassador José Antonio Marcondes de Carvalho. He has a law degree by the Universidade do Distrito Federal. He attended the Brazilian Diplomatic Academy at the Rio Branco Institute from 1975 to 76. He obtained a silver medal as part of the Rio Branco Award in the same institute. He also had a course of advanced diplomatic studies from the Rio Branco Institute, and he is ambassador since 2003. He also held different posts and assignments in Brazil, such as assistant at the Commodities Division, assistant at the Energy and Mineral Resources Division, advisor at the Economic Department, and he was also alternate representative of the Common Market Group of Mercosur from 1998 to 2007. He also held different positions at permanent missions abroad, for example, in the Embassy of Brazil in Washington, in Havana, in the permanent mission of Brazil at the United Nations in New York, in Venezuela, and he is ambassador of Brazil to Austria since December 2018. Welcome, Ambassador. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we also have Professor Alejandro Cunat. He's professor of economics at the University of Vienna. He is also lecturer in economics at the London School of Economics, lecturer in economics at the University of Essex. He holds a PhD in economics from the Harvard University, which was obtained in 2000. He is a licenciado in economics with honors by the University of Valencia. He has written multiple journal articles. He also has participated in chapters in edited volumes. He has a vast number of working papers, and he has attended different seminars and conferences, such as in the Austrian Central Bank, Bank of England, Boston College, Cambridge, Copenhagen Business School, Harvard, Hungarian Academy of Sciences, Oxford, and many more. He has other professional activities and is a research fellow and has written referred papers for American Economic Review, American Economic Journal of Macroeconomics, Economic Theory, and also other administration activities. He has a vast teaching experience. And it's an honor to have all of you here today. Thank you. And I will give the floor to Ambassador Juan Carlos Ojeda. Please, you have the floor and you can make a statement for no more than 10 minutes, please, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and participating in this 30th anniversary of Mercosur. We tried a little bit to put in the context the genesis of this integration process. Even before the actual establishment of Mercosur in 1991, there were several attempts of achieving both regional and economic integration among the Latin American nations. The first were the Latin American Free Trade Association in 1960, the Latin American Common Market in 1965, and the Latin American Integration Association in 1980. In 1991, it was signed the Treaty of Asunción that finally paved the way for the establishment of Mercosur, the Southern Cone Common Market. The democratic regimes of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay share a common perception that the regional framework could act as a parallel process to worldwide multilateralism. During the creation of Mercosur, the policymakers were inspired by the European Union model, taking into account its achievement and success, applying norms and market standards similar to those of the European Union, with the necessary differences according to the characteristics of the region. The resemblance to the European Union can also be found in the realm of principles, such as those linked with human rights. As an initial commitment, the building of regional institutions and regional markets have been the two core goals of Mercosur, and the EU has provided support in this process. The Treaty of Asunción, in this Article 1, sets a main and challenging goal for the integration project, namely the establishment of a common market by December 1994, alongside with, among others, achieving the free circulation of goods, services, productive factors, the establishment of a common external tariff, the coordination of macroeconomic and sectorial policies, and the commitment of member states to harmonize their legislations. Since its creation, Mercosur has played a fundamental role in the economic development of the state parties, allowing greater productive integration among partners through the general and regional value chains, as well as access to new markets through external negotiations. These elements have resulted in an improvement in the quality of life of its citizens. I'm going to speak a little bit about commercial aspects and then of the political aspects. Regarding the commercial aspects, Mercosur is today, as Ambassador Brix was saying, the 5th largest economy in the world, with almost 300 million citizens, with a great natural biodiversity, which is source of energy and food. In these 3 decades of history, Mercosur has positioned itself as an important global supplier of key inputs, particularly in primary sectors and the agriculture industry, with products that meet the highest phytosanitary and quality standards. From the very beginning, Mercosur resulted in increasing flows of foreign direct investment and intra-regional trade. The latter has brought greater diversification to the exports of its partners, conferring a higher degree of relative technological content. Expansion of trade flows in the first decade was accompanied by the institutional development. State members have taken a proactive attitude through specific actions and therefore promote trade flows between them. Going into political and social aspects, the Treaty of Asunción was followed by other foundational instruments of the integrational process. The Economic Complementation Agreement number 18, the Europreto Protocol, the Ushuaia Protocol on Democratic Commitment, the Olivos Protocol on Dispute Settlement, the Asunción Protocol on Promoting and Protecting Human Rights, and the protocol establishing the Mercosur Parliament. Furthermore, the bloc has successfully worked on complementary norms regarding other important dimensions of integration, such as democracy, human rights, migratory mobility, residence, work, social security, education, transportation, judicial cooperation, extradition, environment, consumer rights, and border cities. In this sense, Mercosur, in its 30 years of existence, has concluded more than 100 agreements, not directly on the area of trade, but that contribute to the economic and social integration and welfare of its population. The so-called rights agenda or citizen agenda not only impacts on the quality of life of our population, but also in the trade, in services, and enhances the economic environment for the establishment of investment. Since its origins, Mercosur was based on the principles of democracy and economic development, the core values of a human-face integration. Aligned with these principles, several agreements were signed regarding migration, labor, cultural, and social matters, which are of utmost importance for its inhabitants. Now I'm going to refer to the importance of democracy within the Mercosur. Mercosur member states have shared common values that reflect in their democratic, cultural, pluralistic societies, committed to fundamental liberties, human rights, environmental protection, and sustainable development. They also seek to enhance regional governance and international cooperation with a focus on social and economic development, overcoming poverty, reducing inequalities, and enhancing safety and well-being of their citizens. One of Mercosur's early aims was to secure the region's return to democracy, since all its founding members had emerged from military regimes which prevailed in South America from the 1960s to the 80s. In July 1998, it was signed, together with Bolivia and Chile, the Ushuaia Protocol on Democratic Commitment in Mercosur, instituting democracy as sine qua non condition for the development of the integration process. The clause establishes the protection of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law as core values of the regional bloc. Furthermore, the Parliament of Mercosur created an observatory of democracy to promote the exchange of experiences and cooperation, as well as the monitoring of elections in the Mercosur, the associated members, and those states which require the participation of the observatory. Another pillar is human rights. Human rights are also a priority for Mercosur. All of its member states have ratified the main international instruments for human rights protection, either within the United Nations sphere or the Inter-American system. In the Presidential Declaration on Peace Zone of July 1996, member states agreed upon the, quote, the respect of human rights, fundamental freedoms, social progress, and the protection of environment constitute fundamental elements to the achievement of peace and security of the region, unquote. Furthermore, in 1997, a multilateral agreement on social security was concluded, and 1 year later, a social labor declaration that deals with socio-economic rights. In 2005, Mercosur state members signed the Human Rights Protocol. It includes the civil rights of free access to justice and rights of women, the social rights of social security and health, the economic rights, such as the right to work, cultural rights of education and cultural life, and the collective rights of environment and cultural heritage. With the protocol on the commitment to promote and protect human rights in Mercosur, known as the Clause of Human Rights, member states agreed to jointly cooperate in the promotion and effective protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms through institutional mechanisms. Within the framework of the 30th anniversary of integration process, this year, it will be approved the Mercosur Citizen Charter, an instrument by which their citizens benefit from belonging to the Mercosur integration process. It's very important to mention another pillar, the Mercosur Structural Conversions Fund. This fund is a very effective instrument to reduce asymmetries within the bloc, to seek convergence of a smaller economy through compensation mechanisms, particularly important for smaller economies like Paraguay and Uruguay. Through an annual contribution, FOSAMs allocate funds to projects aimed at promoting competitiveness, social cohesion, and reduction of asymmetries among members involved in the process. In this context, Mercosur approved, the FOSAM approved the health emergency created by COVID pandemic, approved the expansion of a plurinational project, on biotechnologies applied to health that allow the immediate allocation of non-refundable resources to the development of diagnostic capacities in the region. Regarding our present, Mercosur advances in spite of difficulties. Mercosur is an open and dynamic process with the main aim to promote a common space that generates business and investments opportunities through the competitive integration of national economies into the international market. As a result, it has established multiple agreements with countries or group of countries, granting them, in some cases, the status of associated states, this being the case of several South American countries. Associated states have trade preferences with the state parties. Mercosur has also signed commercial, political, or cooperation agreements with nations and blocs in all 5 continents. Mercosur takes advantages of many opportunities and is of increasingly globalized and interconnected world, and as a main platform for accessing new markets and reach a better international economic insertion. We think that the world of the 21st century should be one of integration, complementary cooperation and solidarity, even more among countries which share not only borders, but common goals of development, prosperity, and peaceful coexistence. Mercosur today is an internationally recognized brand that, although it can be improved, is seen with interest among trade partners and international actors. While looking ahead in the future, and I'm just starting to close up my presentation, Mercosur has currently trade agreements that grant preferential access to different markets and blocks, and it is committed to continuing the negotiations that are taking place, convinced that foreign trade is one of our most solid development instruments. Therefore, this March 26 is both a date for celebration and an opportunity for deep thought. Today, Mercosur is not only a fact of reality, it is a collective, ongoing construction. Mercosur celebrates its 30th anniversary in a very different world from the one where it was born. New actors have positioned themselves in the international political and economical scene, processing changes in trade flows and their composition. Therefore, it is increasingly necessary to explore and evaluate new ways to integrate and negotiate with the world. Mercosur has gone through 30 years as the most important and successful process in the region. To sum up, on the occasion of this key date, it is worth reflecting on the achievements made to reach the objectives of the Treaty of Asunción and the challenges ahead, with the framework of a totally different historical context from 30 years ago. We believe that it's time to open other doors, to walk new paths, to diversify our ties, to genuinely open ourselves to the world, contemplating the potential of our national production and competitiveness. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much for your intervention, Ambassador Juan Carlos Ojeda. And now I will give the floor to Ambassador José Antonio Marcondes. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. And as I greet fellow panelists in this webinar, I would like to thank the Vienna Diplomatic Academy for the opportunity to share some thoughts about Mercosur. Mercosur has always had a much more prominent role than just creating a free trade area or a customs union. It is actually the anchor for a deep and comprehensive integration process in South America as a whole, especially in our 4 countries, as well as a relevant tool for our international insertion in the world economy. Mercosur was built on the principles of democracy and free trade. It represented the overcoming of decades of friction and mistrust based on the creation of a now level playing field for its member states. No analysis of what Mercosur represents should fail to understand that our integration process has become much more than a governmental policy. It is now enshrined as a state goal for all of our 4 countries, in spite of changes in governments. All of us, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, have agreed and continue to uphold the importance of Mercosur. As President Bolsonaro said in the last Mercosur summit last year, the search for consensus in the bloc, even during the pandemic of COVID-19, has not led to inertia or stagnation. On the contrary, with flexibility and pragmatism, we have acted to ensure our points of convergence surpass our differences. We can say that back in 1991, our 4 countries embarked on a journey to jointly craft a new chapter of our histories with benefits in all fields. I wish to echo what was mentioned by Ambassador of Uruguay when he referred that Mercosur was created in the context of a democratization in South America, but at the same time, Mercosur has been a very important tool for reinforcing and guaranteeing democracies in its member states. As democratization crystallized in the Mercosur countries, the bloc created commitments for its member states that enshrine the principle of democracy as a cornerstone. If there is a departure from democratic principles, members of the bloc can lose privileges and can also be subject to suspension membership. Turning to the economic dimension, I'd like to recall that by the time Mercosur was being created, the world was deeply engaged in the negotiations related to free trade, such as the Uruguay round of GATT, which culminated in the creation of the World Trade Organization. Economic integration in Europe was advancing, while in Latin America, new arrangements were being negotiated after the Treaty of Montevideo 1980, as Ambassador of Uruguay has mentioned, it created the Latin American Integration Association. Under the umbrella of that association, the countries of Latin America were allowed to finalize sub-regional economic agreements. Before this, any trade concession had to follow the most favored nation principle to all countries in the region. That created obstacles to liberalization, given the then competing profiles of many Latin American economies. This new, more realistic paradigm made possible the creation of Mercosur, but it also allowed us to establish agreements with other countries in Latin America. As a consequence, today Mercosur has free trade undertakings with all of South America and also with Mexico. With this, South American countries finally overcame a logic that plagued the continent since the colonial times, namely that of trading with outside partners and turning their backs to their neighbors. As I turn to rather more to the qualitative analysis of our integration process embodied in Mercosur, we can observe that internal tariffs converged to zero during the 90s, at the same time that our common external tariff was consolidated. It is important to notice that economic liberalization embraced by Mercosur is not, and I repeat, is not based on mercantilist ideas, but rather on the purpose of integrating value chains and establishing a level playing field in the region. As part of an ambitious integration process, the deep integration, Mercosur countries were able to go beyond the liberalizing trade of goods to encompass a wide array of public policies, such as consular activities, education, culture, and justice. These dimensions were also applicable to the relationship between Mercosur and other South American countries, which, as Ambassador of Uruguay has mentioned, all associated states to our bloc. Mercosur has provided many concrete benefits for the citizens of our countries in terms of international transit and residence, validation of diplomas, social security, and others. As part of the celebrations of the 30 years of Mercosur, the summit of our bloc, which is being held today, will unveil a citizenship statute, a consolidation of rights and benefits for citizens accruing from the integration. In this regard, I'd like to quote President Bolsonaro again in the last Mercosur summit, and I quote, "The benefits the bloc has already created in terms of regional stability and economic gains are encouraging and for an even more comprehensive regional integration." And I unquote. With these foundations, the next steps of Mercosur are towards the deepening and the modernization of the economic relationship between our members on the one side and expanding its international reach on the other side. Currently, Mercosur countries are improving the non-tariff dimensions of their trade relationship internally and with South America, such as trade in services, government purchases, investments, and electronic trade. Outside Latin America, Mercosur is negotiating several agreements in addition to those already in force, as mentioned by my good friend and colleague from Uruguay. At this point, I would like to bring to your attention that Mercosur was built on another important principle, that of open regionalism. We do not favor autarkic worldviews. On the contrary, Mercosur is intended to be a connecting point for its member states and the rest of the world. As I wrap up these comments, I want to mention to you that differently from the time of its inception, now Mercosur faces an extremely unfavorable context to strive for economic liberalization outside the region. There has been a significant rise in protectionism in the past few years, which has led to a crisis of multilateral trade regime, best encapsulated by the crisis around the WTO. This comes on top of already frustrated efforts around the Doha Development Round, prompting countries to look for better opportunities on a bilateral basis. All this context is obviously severely worsened by the economic crisis brought about by the current pandemic and the resurgence, the very dangerous resurgence of discourses such as food sovereignty, industry sovereignty, and economic sovereignty. All those discourses are not but disguised forms of protectionism. But we are convinced that free trade and deeper integration amongst the Mercosur countries and between Mercosur and other parts of the world are the solution for a fast economic recovery, not protectionist measures. They are never solutions. We are also optimistic that the prospects of signing new agreements, such as those concluded with the European Free Trade Agreement and of the European Union. I thank for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your intervention, Ambassador. And now I give the floor to Professor Cunat.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the Diplomatic Academy for their invitation to participate at this event. And let me, first of all, wish Ambassadors Marcondes and Ojeda happy birthday for these 30 years of Mercosur. I'm not going to sing happy birthday, don't worry, I'm a bad singer. But I would like to actually read something to you from a very famous international trade, from a very famous international trade economist, Immanuel Kant. The spirit of commerce, which is incompatible with war, sooner or later gains the upper hand in every state. As the power of money is perhaps the most dependable of all the means included under the state power, states see themselves forced without any moral urge to promote honorable peace and by mediation to prevent war wherever it threatens to break out. This comes from Perpetual Peace by Immanuel Kant, as I said. So why am I bringing this up? I mean, this has already been mentioned indirectly or directly by the ambassadors. And let me become a bit Eurocentric here. And let me go back to the creation of the European Union. The European Union is created among the ruins of the World War II. Okay, and the Treaty of Rome leads to a customs union which has developed into a wider area in which member countries are at peace with one another, cooperate imperfectly, but cooperate in many domains and share a view on civil and political rights. South America is a continent with its own history of conflict, dictatorships, etc. A process of economic cooperation such as Mercosur not only contributes to material well-being, but also to political cooperation and should be therefore welcomed as a great thing. Does Mercosur proceed at the right speed? Well, let's think about the European Union. Has it proceeded always at the right speed? Like any process in which the political wills of many actors are involved, it speeds up, it stalls. The important thing is that it continues to be alive. So 30 years is little time with perspective and should be viewed in this sense as the last scene perhaps of Casablanca, the movie in which Rick tells Captain Renault, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And I think this is the spirit in which I hope Mercosur will continue to flourish. Now, anyway, I was not invited to talk politics, probably, I'm an economist. And in the context of Mercosur, I cannot avoid, as an international trade economist, I cannot avoid talking about the Mercosur, the EU-Mercosur Free Trade Agreement. Let me first talk a little bit about the past or the recent past. What have we had over the last 20 years? We've had a failure of the WTO to expand trade since the Doha round, which has forced countries to search for other ways to do so. In South America, we have had actually in recent times more market-friendly governments. President Macri's government in Argentina, for example, President Bolsonaro's government in Brazil, which has perhaps given some push towards a free trade agreement. And on the side of the European Union, we've had a relative loss of presence in South America. China has gained influence and weight, on relative weight in trade with these countries. And of course, we are confronting, or we've been confronting over the last few years, protectionist trends like President Trump's policies, the China-US trade war, and as was mentioned by the ambassadors, also the paralysis of the WTO. Let's not forget also that the world's economic center of gravity is shifting from the Atlantic to the Pacific. I imagine that in the views or in the minds of many European politicians, there's the idea that it would be good to have access in the medium to long run to the Pacific. And of course, South America is a port of entry to some extent into the Pacific. Where are we now in this process? We are at the stage of ratification, and this is proving to be difficult. I mean, just to give you a couple of country names, Austria and France, among others, are being difficult in this respect. And here I would like to make a reflection that probably helps us understand what's going on, why some countries are struggling to, in Europe, are struggling to agree to this free trade agreement. Let me distinguish between north-north and south-south trade on the one hand, and what I will call north-south trade, okay? Why do we trade with one another? What are the forces that lead to gains from trade? I'm simplifying to some extent. I'm going to talk about comparative advantage and increasing returns. Freer trade leads to an increase in the extent of the market. And in the presence of increasing returns to scale, a feature of technology, this brings about increases in productivity and material well-being. Free trade also leads countries to exploit their comparative advantages and gain from trade by specializing in their relatively strong industries. The downside from this is that actually countries also have comparative disadvantages, which means that certain industries will shrink whenever a process of trade liberalization occurs. And of course, this might lead to unemployment in the short run, to changes in income distribution within a country, etc. That is, to the presence of winners and losers. Now, let me think about the European Union. And this is one moment that I always relish in Austria, because I enjoy telling the Austrians that they are very similar to the Germans, with apologies to the Austrians. I know that they don't take this well, but what is the European Union? The European Union, in the big scheme of things, is a collection of countries that are very similar, with very similar comparative advantages, which means that gains from trade occur because of the expansion in the extent of the market, not because of we are exploiting comparative advantages. That's why actually the European Union has been such a successful experiment in trade integration over the last 60, 70 years. What's going on when we open to trade between the European Union and Mercosur? Here, the comparative advantage argument is going to be very important. And of course, this is going to lead to losses for some groups within the European Union, and of course also within Mercosur. Should we be surprised that Austria is supporting or is very cold about ratifying this trade agreement, or France for that matter? Well, in countries in which you have that farmers have a strong influence in politics, of course, you're going to have resistance to free trade agreement that is likely to hurt French or Austrian farmers. Should we be so concerned about these things? I think that in the short run, not really. The immediate effects of the free trade agreement, should it be ratified, are likely to be small in the short run. Let's be clear. The EU doesn't trade that much with the Mercosur in comparison with what they trade with the world. So the influence of Mercosur of Mercosur exports in general on the European Union is likely to be, in aggregate terms, not that dramatic, not that terrible for some industries that are very concerned in the European Union. Liberalization is going to be phased in, which means that actually it's going to proceed at a very gradual pace, which means that actually short-term impacts, again, are likely to be very small. And besides, liberalization is modest. Okay, for example, I've read in the past that people were concerned about Argentinian and Uruguayan and Brazilian beef flooding the European markets. That's unlikely to happen given the terms of the free trade agreement. Perhaps things will be different with some other products like ethanol, where actually the liberalization might have stronger effects. So I think that the fears that I'm perceiving from the European side are perhaps a bit exaggerated, at least as far as the economic arguments that I've heard. For the medium term, maybe this trade liberalization is going to be the occasion for actually deeper integration in the future. Once you have created tariff quotas as the ones that are contemplated in the free trade agreement, chances are that in the future these tariff quotas will be expanded. Okay, but you know, if we give time to the economies to adjust to this trade liberalization, I would not expect this to have these dramatic effects that we have heard about in the at least on the European side. I'm pretty much done with my speech. I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time.
Yes, please, if you want to conclude, perhaps, and
So
then we will
let
open the
me
floor for
stop
discussion.
here then. So all in all, I think that Mercosur is a great thing, that it contributes to, as I said, to material as well as political well-being. And my hope is that actually there will be more trade between the European Union and the Mercosur. And of course, if there are going to be losses on the European side or on the South American side, that's part of the political game within the European Union, within the South American countries, to actually make sure that the redistribution of incomes makes sure that no one loses from trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your very interesting participation. And before continuing, I want to remind the people that are watching on Facebook that if you have any questions, you can write them on the chat, and then I will read them out loud here for our speakers to answer. And well, it's all very interesting what you have been mentioning, and there's a lot of topics for discussion, but I would like to begin by mentioning that during its 30 years of existence, Mercosur became the most important and perhaps the most successful integration process in the region, and has been adapting to the challenges of each period. And since this talk is more about like a reflection of Mercosur during these 30 years, but also like the future, I would like to ask all of you, what are the new challenges beyond the COVID-19 pandemic for Mercosur, and what are the changes that it will need to do, if any, in order to continue to exist and to achieve all these purposes? And some of you already mentioned some of the challenges, but perhaps you could elaborate further or mention some other challenges. And yes, so I don't know if any of you would like to take the floor first. Okay, thank you. Ambassador Marcondes, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Very interesting points you raised, and I think I'd like to probably expand on that, and maybe also to refer to the initial remarks of Ambassador Brix. You know, there are as my colleague from Uruguay mentioned, as well as Professor Cunat, there are some similarities in our process of integration, but there are some differences, and marked differences, which we should not fail to understand. I mentioned when I shared my thoughts, that we came from a period of mistrust in South America, but Europe emerged. The European integration came on the wake of not one, but two wars in this continent, devastating wars. That's a big difference. Second difference on that, and let me not go that much back in the past, but in the case of, it's a huge difference between Mercosur and the European Union, although we are a smaller number of countries. I mentioned, and I'm certain that you did not fail to catch that. Mercosur countries are insisting, they are persevering. We're not talking about exiting any country in Mercosur. Is talking about leaving Mercosur. On the contrary, we're all trying to look for better integration. We're looking for more ways of integrating ourselves. That's the biggest challenge. That's the biggest challenge. Staying the course, promoting the continuation of the process, not interrupting what that was, and not allowing discourses, narratives, and disguised forms of disruption from the main goals of Mercosur of integration to prevail. The Professor Cunat mentioned the advantages of free trade, the advantages of integration, and all those things we are convinced that they should go. We are doing, all countries. I mean, I would be remiss if I did not mention that all countries have their political timings, they have their political challenges domestically, but all countries, in spite of the political challenges that we have, in spite of the difficulties, and I wish to leave for a moment aside the issue of the pandemic, all countries have to seek ways of going forward. The issue, the main challenge of Mercosur is not a challenge that is unsurmountable because it never occurred. We are talking about persevering and staying the course. That's the main challenge that we have, which is it's a non-issue. We have not had cases of countries trying to leave Mercosur, but we have countries of trying to join Mercosur and reinforcing our integration process. But I'll leave at that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Ambassador Juan Carlos or Professor Cunat, would you like to add something, perhaps?
Just on my side, I want to reaffirm what my colleague, friend, Ambassador of Brazil said. I mean, that there is throughout all the history about this 30 years, there is a common purpose and a commitment of keeping with this process, regardless of difficulties, of the different times, of some crisis in the economic fields, whatever, but this process, no matter the government, but all the 4 countries keep on working on that. This is clear, and it's very clear with us, as well as the principles that the foundational principles of the integration process, as we said, human rights and democracy and free trade. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Cunat, would you like to add something?
Thanks for upgrading me to ambassador. Yeah, I mean, in reply to Ambassador Marcondes, yes, absolutely. We've had Brexit, unfortunately, but let me make a reflection here. What is Brexit? Brexit is the result of a lot of integration, economic integration, migration of people or free mobility of people, and the necessity that comes to harmonize lots of measures, regulation, etc., to accompany trade integration that were not acceptable for the British people or for an important share of the British population. So yes, absolutely, we have, and I think we will miss the Brits. But I think that Brexit is, in a sense, the result of a lot of integration. Okay, so I'm not wishing this happens to Mercosur, but I think this is something that at some point Mercosur or the countries involved in Mercosur should come to terms with. And I hope, in a sense, that they face this problem at some point, because this would imply that they have proceeded further in integrating economically, politically. Now, let me go back to COVID. I think COVID is, or the pandemic is an important phenomenon, of course, with its tragic sides. And I'm not certain, I don't know how much of it is going to remain. Of course, it is hurting us nowadays. It might create financial problems for certain countries, not only in Latin America or in South America, also in Southern Europe. This is possible. I wonder actually what's going to happen to human mobility because of COVID. My fear is that we are going to have here a backlash about or against mobility of people. in our world. How much of it is going to take place? I don't know. Is it going to affect trade flows and trade integration? About that, I'm not so certain. You know, of course, moving goods across countries implies moving people, but the people that are moving with those goods in the transport industry, for example, are a very small number, and in that sense, I find they are a small risk for the transmission of the pandemic or something like that. Okay, so I don't think we are in the times of the Silk Road, in which actually the Silk Road became the highway for the plague, so to speak. But I'm more concerned about actually the pandemic having a backlash on people's mobility. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your inputs on this first question. And I will allow myself to make another question while we wait for people on Facebook. If they want to also raise a question, please write it on the chat. Some of the arguments for the lack of integration in Latin America is the proliferation of agreements. And as Ambassador Carlos Ojeda mentioned, in 30 years, for example, Mercosur had signed more than 100 agreements. And also another argument is a kind of fear from states of losing sovereignty, which is often disguised also as protectionism. And there was an argument about this during the opening remarks. And my question will be, if you, first of all, you can disagree on these arguments, of course, but how can Mercosur, with so many agreements and requiring a certain degree of perhaps sovereignty or commitment from the states to work, let's say, how can it support integration? Or is it like also maybe a matter of the members to deal with this, to commit, as you mentioned before? So I would like to hear your opinions of this on this. I see Ambassador Marcondes is already raising his hand. Please.
I think I should make a distinction of on your what you understood from my colleague from Uruguay. When he mentioned 100 agreements, he mentioned on the internal affairs of Mercosur, which there are some, as I mentioned, there are some similarities with European integration, but there are some distances that we have. We do not have a heavy bureaucracy as the European Union has. What the Mercosur integration process is a more of a member states driven process rather than dictating from the Commission, as the case, sometimes the case in Europe. The 100 agreements that Ambassador Ojeda mentioned, these are deliberations and achievements, solutions. Maybe in Europe they call laws or legislation. What he mentioned are 100 issues of new norms for the domestic dealings within Mercosur. Not that we have too many agreements. I wish we had 200 in that of the ones he mentioned. But we're talking about, these are not agreements with other countries. These are internal affairs because of the dissimilarities between the process of Mercosur and the process in Europe. I just wanted to make that so you don't build a reasoning on a misperception of an idea that my colleague mentioned.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising this point. I think it's really important. And yeah, my question was mainly of these agreements that at some point I was reading some arguments that they have so many, even internal, that in the end they're not achieved, or they're like overlapping because they're about the same issue and so on. But okay, I just wanted to also like clarify this. And I don't know if any of you would like to also add something to this question, or okay, please, Professor Cunat.
Again, for the sake of making this controversial, Ambassador Marcondes, I mean, one issue that was confronted by the European Union at some point is the following: once trade integration gets really deep, it's difficult to avoid harmonizing regulations, because without those harmonized regulations, we run the risk of having races to the bottom. In terms of gaining comparative advantage, for example, by regulating, I don't know, labor standards, any other standards, in a very lax way. So in a sense, I know you didn't use these words, let me use them. The dictatorship of Brussels is, in a sense, perhaps a lesser evil. The need to have a center that actually harmonizes certain things so that actually trade integration can proceed. Once again, perhaps Mercosur is not at this stage because the process of integration hasn't reached the level of depth that the one at the European Union has reached. But we cannot discard that at some point in the future, and I insist, this might be good news. You will be at the stage in which you might find yourselves in the need to do the something similar. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other comment on this.
Yeah, I'd like to react to that, if I may.
Yeah, please.
I hate to be making a dialogue with Professor Cunat, but I'm actually enjoying this. Let me tell you, he knows that better than I do, and better than I'll be able to verbalize this. That you should understand the different processes with different perspectives. There's no model of integration that should be the one determining how countries should do. I mean, I could have, he agrees on that. On the way, the speed of how integration should be run. Again, we are four countries. We are not over 20 as the European Union is. But the issue of, and he mentioned the fact that once the integration process goes deeper, and it is correct. I mean, we have not mentioned the monetary union of the European Union, which is a very challenging issue. Which puts the European Union at a different level. I'm not trying to compare, and no one is saying which one is better, because there's no such thing as a model of integration. There are issues of integration that suit countries in different moments. But the issue of, and the 100 agreements, as Ambassador Ojeda has mentioned, and you, Ms. Cazares, misunderstood the meaning of that. The 100 issues, so the over 100 issues that he mentioned, they mean the construction of a communal legislation, of harmonizing texts, of having the same rules applying for the same thing. The harmonization of a legislation is perhaps, it's certainly, I don't buy the dictatorship of anywhere. Mercosur is based on democracy, and I think the European Union as well. There's no such thing as a dictatorship from anywhere, and member states are not going to swallow that. But the point is that he mentioned that type of autocratic situation. But what I'd like to mention is that the legal challenge that we all have to harmonize, to make legislation compatible, it's a huge effort, and it's extremely complicated and extremely takes a lot of time. But there's another issue which is also very important to note in this process. Although it's complicated, although we don't have the same type of institutions as the European Union has, because we have not decided to have. It's not, and we have not, this is not, allow me to be very, very colloquial on this. We're not copycatting anyone. We are just crafting our own integration system according to our own situation. So that's logic, that's the way it should be and the way it is being. We are certainly harmonizing legislation. We are going through this challenge of making a common legislation. Our, if you go on our acquis communautaire, I have no idea how to say that in English. The legal frameworks that we have, the legal, the number of legislations, the number of norms that we have, it is extremely high, and it is serving on the speed we are going our own interests, and it is also. I would now revert from Professor Cunat to Ambassador Brix that I'm not certain, Ambassador, that the article that you referred to is the best source of information on the backsliding.
If I may respond to this, Vanessa, is it okay if I'm allowed also?
Yes, yes, please go ahead, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I much enjoy the point we are at our discussion at the moment, because I think this sort of comparing this Mercosur and the European Union is very helpful in understanding the differences, but also see important similarities. Both ambassadors spoke so much about the peace project in the early 90s. And this was at the beginning of the European Union as well. And the idea of the European Union was not to start with politics, but to start with the economic cooperation. And that's rather similar in the case of Latin American integration, I would say. And also, one of the basic principles of the European Union is that we have to deal with strong members and weaker members, bigger and smaller states. And you have a similar problem in Mercosur because of the composition of the organization and the member states. So I think there is something where we can see that it's possible to reflect on developments that we did earlier in Europe than it was possible in Latin America. And I would also include what Professor Cunat said, his warning about Brexit. It's too early days for a warning of Brexit, because there is no political union as an aim of integration in the Latin American countries. So there is no ever closer political union as we have in the European Union. And we learned it actually the hard way with Brexit, that it is very difficult in times when you have new discussions about sovereignty and also national interest, to continue with a deeper integration. And I'm afraid to say, Professor Cunat spoke why there is some hesitation about the trade agreement between Mercosur and European Union. I'm afraid to say this has to do with the inner situation of the European Union, maybe more than with the content of the text of the agreement. And Professor Cunat mentioned the economic arguments which are brought forward. Agriculture plays a special role. 1/3 of the budget of the European Union is given to agriculture, and this is enormous, whatever one thinks about that. But actually, it has also to do with the notion that in the European Union, the idea of who are the actors issues like climate change, but also ecological issues, democracy. This is at the moment not so very clear, and that's the reason why at the moment in some European countries talking about this free trade agreement between Mercosur and the European Union is simply toxic. It's simply toxic at the moment. And it will take a long time to change this. Brussels is always famous for compromises. And I hope very much for the Mercosur countries that we will find a compromise. And as you know, you have good partners with Portugal, Spain, and other countries in the European Union who speak out for you. But from my point of view, these inner problems of the European Union about who runs the shop will continue for some time. So you have to take your time with all this. And I'm optimistic in the long run. It's obvious that we should have such an agreement. But at the moment, as I said, it feels very toxic, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ambassador Brix. I see Professor Cunat is raising his hand.
Yeah, very briefly.
Please.
First of all, I agree with Ambassador Brix. I think that the points he raises is very important. I mean, it's sometimes very unclear who in the European Union calls the shots. Sometimes you have the feeling that the Brussels is ahead of the countries or even of the citizens. This sometimes has been very successful, sometimes has not. I totally agree. Now, briefly, just to make sure Ambassador Marcondes didn't misinterpret me, I was not trying to give lessons. I was saying that only that those 100 treaties that have become famous by now in this discussion, of course, would have a solution by the possibility of simplification by having Brussels, which comes with some other issues. So in a sense, I'm not saying that you are condemned to have Brussels, obviously not Brussels, somewhere in South America, but you are condemned at some point to make a choice in between having this very, let me call it, politically decentralized structure as Mercosur has now, or perhaps giving up power to a, let me call it, federation. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get here into very precise political terms, but this will be a choice sooner or later if the Mercosur member countries keep on trying to integrate. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. I don't know if Ambassador Ojeda would also like to participate because my video was frozen, so I don't know if you were raising your hand. Excuse me if you were.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think all the participants had very clear the process. We have different realities. I cannot speak for the European Union, but I know the process we are following with the Mercosur. It's very different. We don't have the supranationality. So that's why countries agree on a certain subject. And then these norms are internalized into the country. It's a different process, a very different process. Plus, I mean, the integration at Mercosur is an ongoing process, still under construction. As we are celebrating the 30 years, not the 60th year anniversary. So it's still a lot to go on, and the process will mature and adopt probably change by itself some dynamics. Yeah, but what is persistent is the will of our governments and peoples with this commitment. Yeah. Integration, even in the case of Uruguay, is in the constitution itself. I mean, so we have it very clear. There's no doubt, and we keep on working on that. Through different paths, that we keep on working internally and also in the negotiations with other countries and blocs. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have two questions. One of them was, who would you think will be the next new member of Mercosur? Perhaps if you would like to discuss that. And there is another one that, what will be the main achievements for Latin America after these 30 years of Mercosur? Meaning, what can we learn from it? What can be improved? And perhaps all of you could mention maybe 2-3 achievements or lessons. I mean, because there is always room for improvement. So please, the floor is yours. If anyone would like to comment on this. Yeah, Ambassador Marcondes, please.
Thank you. No, this is I cannot speculate on who would be the next country to join Mercosur. I mean, it's an individual choice. I don't think it would be on my part to overguess what other countries are doing. But I must mention what was mentioned before, both by my colleague from Uruguay and myself. We have a network of relations within South America that are already making, there is no such a big wall between Mercosur and the rest of South American countries. No, by no means. We do have these association schemes based on free trade, based also on citizen issues, as Ambassador mentioned. So we have there's no huge unsurmountable barriers between ourselves. Certainly, the four of us are much closer related in the value chains, in the economic integration, much beyond free trade considerations. The achievements, I think I'd like to get back to what I mentioned before. You know, the fact that we have stayed the course that we started 30 years ago, and the integration of Mercosur is certainly deepening. We have not decided to have what the European Union, in its own wisdom, has decided to do. That's a different course that answers in European circumstances, which we do not have. So the European Union parameters are important to look. They can be, we can draw lessons from the European Union integration, but we can also, we do not mean to teach anybody on this, because I mentioned there's no such thing as the real model of integration. There are different sets of integration, and that should be understood. The main achievement of Mercosur is that as it enters into its maturity, so to speak, we are still happy, and we are looking forward and looking to continue this deepening of Mercosur rather than stagnating, rather than backsliding.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please, Professor Cunat.
Yeah, this time I agree with Ambassador Marcondes. No big controversy. I insist. I never try to give any teachings to the South American countries. I think I also agree with him. Trying to guess who is going to be the next member, that's very difficult. And as for the achievement, I think the achievement, I don't know what it is, but we know what the outcome is. So they must have achieved something. Actually, when 4 countries decide to sign a treaty, and then you have other countries joining as associate countries, or I don't remember what the terminology is, but this is actually a measure of success. And the measure of success is that other countries want to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Please, Ambassador Ojeda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. For me, I mean, the main assets are the consolidation of the process on the basis of democracy, human rights, and this sense of belonging of the citizens. I mean, in any of the 4 countries, I mean, the inhabitants, they feel they belong to the Mercosur. They're very proud about that and the benefits they're getting of their this belonging. So that's very important. Who is going to join next? Well, it's difficult to predict, but as Ambassador Marcondes was saying, there is a net that was created through the agreements we were talking about, the Association of Latin American Countries. There is a very deep net, a fabric of agreements that connect all the countries in Latin America and give preferences to each other. So we are much closer to each other than with other regions. And as Professor Cunat was saying, it's very clear, yeah, that the success is, I mean, when other countries are looking at us, and I mean, we are a partner for business, trade, whatever. That means that, I mean, we are somehow successful and credible. So that's the balance is very positive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. And yeah, I think the main achievement, as for what I hear, will be that it's a consolidated process, but it's still ongoing at the same time. And well, before concluding, I don't know if any of you would like to add something, another comment. Also, Ambassador Brix, that is still here with us. If there's something to add before the closing remarks, please let me know.
Only a comment, because I have to explain why I quoted The Economist. I quoted The Economist because this is a magazine famous to be a champion of free trade and economic liberalism. So I very much wondered why this article appears just now, right now. And after the discussion, I have to say, I think you have all reason for a happy anniversary. I'm not following the title of the article of The Economist.
Yes, please, Ambassador Marcondes.
Thank you, Ambassador Brix. By no means you should read my comment as I was trying to censor the magazines in which you go get some information, but some analysis really need to be looked with a lot of care. But again, thank you very much, Ambassador Brix. Thank you very much, Professor Cunat, Juan Carlos, and Ms. Cazares. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot, and to be continued. Thank you.
Absolutely. If there are no other comments at the moment, I would like to thank you on behalf of the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. I want to thank our speakers, Ambassador Juan Carlos Ojeda, Ambassador Jose Antonio Marcondes, and Professor Alejandro Cunat for the valuable participation in this lecture, Mercosur, 30 years, a look ahead into the future. And also thank the audience that joined us via Facebook. And of course, Ambassador Brix for also his really interesting and valuable comments. And well, Mercosur is a vast process with many topics to be discussed, but so little time. So I agree that this should be continued. And today's discussion presented interesting insights about the ongoing process and the different perspectives that led to an enriching discussion. So if there's nothing else to add, I would like to conclude this event. And thank you so much for joining us and for all those interesting.
Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you all.